History does not always change with noise. Sometimes it shifts quietly, almost unnoticed, until one day the entire landscape looks different. The story of BRICS belongs to that silent tradition. On the surface, it looks like a group of 5 nations trying to cooperate. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. But beneath that surface, there is something far more powerful happening. The foundations of a new global order are being laid brick by brick, policy by policy, agreement by agreement. What makes it so unique is not only the size of these nations, but the subtle way in which they are moving. They are not making flashy announcements every day. They are not throwing grand celebrations at every step. They are letting the work itself speak, slowly but steadily altering the world's financial and political balance. The quiet formation of this order begins with numbers, because numbers tell a story that cannot be ignored. Together, BRICS nations represent over 40% of the world's population and nearly 1/3 of global GDP. If you add in purchasing power parity, the economic weight grows even more significant. These are not small players. These are nations that control land, labor, energy, and resources at a scale that no single Western bloc can match. Yet, unlike the G7 or NATO, they are not built on a single uniform ideology. Their strength lies in diversity, different histories, different economies, different systems of governance, all united by one principle: independence from Western control. For decades, the global order was shaped by Western powers. Trade was denominated in dollars, debt was managed by Western-led institutions, and rules of commerce flowed from Washington, Brussels, and London. The system was designed not only to facilitate trade, but also to reinforce dominance. If a country stepped out of line, it could be punished financially through sanctions, through exclusion from systems like SWIFT, through control over capital flows. This silent dominance was not always questioned because many nations lacked the capacity to resist. BRICS is rewriting that rulebook quietly, without fanfare, without shouting. Brazil brings agricultural power to the table, capable of feeding entire continents. Russia brings vast reserves of oil, gas, and minerals, resources that every industrial nation needs. India brings demographic strength, a massive and growing workforce, and one of the fastest growing digital economies in the world. China brings industrial dominance, infrastructure expertise, and technological advancement that rivals any nation on earth. South Africa, though smaller in size, brings access to Africa, a continent that will define much of the world's growth in the 21st century. The quiet brilliance of BRICS is that these strengths do not overlap. They complement. Where one nation lacks, another supplies. Where one faces pressure, another shields. Together, they form a circle of protection against external dominance. One of the reasons this new order is forming silently is because it relies on patience rather than sudden shifts. The West is used to loud campaigns, wars, sanctions, interventions, regime changes. BRICS plays a longer game. They sign trade deals that look small today, but accumulate into systemic change tomorrow. They build banks, payment systems, and digital corridors that initially appear experimental, but later reveal themselves as alternatives to Western tools. Every step is incremental, but when combined, the steps become a march. It is a march that does not require noise, because its strength lies in inevitability. What makes this quiet formation more dangerous for the old order is its subtlety. When you hear of a revolution, you imagine crowds in the streets, governments falling, leaders overthrown. But a financial revolution does not need fire in the streets. It only needs a shift in trust. If nations begin settling trade in their own currencies, the dollar's grip weakens. If countries choose to borrow from BRICS banks rather than the IMF, Western leverage declines. If resource deals are signed outside the old system loses relevance. The beauty of this strategy is that it does not require confrontation. It does not provoke immediate retaliation. It simply builds an alternative until the alternative becomes too large to ignore. The quiet formation of this order can be seen in the Belt and Road projects across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Ports, railways, highways, and digital cables are being laid down not just as infrastructure, but as arteries of influence. A port built with Chinese financing in Africa becomes a gateway for BRICS trade. A payment platform launched between India and Russia becomes a foundation for future transactions. These are not accidents, they are building blocks. When connected, they form a system that does not ask permission from Western powers. It creates its own legitimacy through function. If a farmer in Brazil can sell soybeans to China in yuan, if an Indian tech firm can settle accounts with Russia outside SWIFT, if an African government can borrow for development from the new development bank instead of the World Bank, then the system has already shifted. Silence in this context is not weakness. Silence is strategy. The global order does not collapse overnight. Empires are not destroyed by noise. They are eroded by the gradual withdrawal of relevance. BRICS understands this deeply. That is why you rarely see them advertising themselves as a rival to the West. They do not need to. Their actions speak louder than declarations, and by the time the world fully notices, the order will already have changed. This silent formation also reshapes geopolitics. Consider how nations outside BRICS are now knocking on the door. Countries in the Middle East, in Africa, in Latin America, all expressing interest in joining or aligning. Why? Because they see an alternative to dependency. They see a chance to negotiate trade deals on equal footing, not dictated by old hierarchies. They see that silence is not absence of power. It is the presence of a different kind of power, one that does not require validation from the old centers of authority. When we speak of a revolution, we imagine the day it explodes. But the truth is, revolutions begin long before the explosion. They begin in whispers, in agreements signed quietly, in meetings closed to cameras, in strategies executed with patience. That is what is happening with BRICS today. The quiet formation of a new order is underway, and the world is watching without realizing it is already inside the revolution. For nearly 8 decades, the US dollar has been more than a currency. It has been a weapon, a shield, and a throne. After the Second World War, the dollar became the heart of the global financial system through the Bretton Woods arrangement. Even after gold was removed as its anchor in the 1970s, the dollar remained dominant because oil, trade, and international debt were tied to it. Nations had no choice but to hold dollars. It gave America unmatched power, the ability to sanction, to freeze assets, to decide who participates in the global marketplace. For years, this grip seemed unbreakable, but now, beneath the surface, BRICS is loosening it, quietly, methodically, and with steps that appear small on their own, but devastating in accumulation. The weakening of the dollar does not start with loud declarations, it starts with dissatisfaction. Countries around the world are tired of being trapped in a system where one nation can control their economic survival. when sanctions cut Russia off from SWIFT, when Iran could not sell oil despite demand, when entire economies collapsed because access to dollars was blocked, the message was clear. Reliance on a single currency made nations vulnerable. This vulnerability became the seed of resistance. BRICS took that seed and began to water it with alternatives. Consider trade settlements. Historically, if India wanted to buy oil from Russia, the transaction would go through dollars. If Brazil wanted to sell soybeans to China, it would pass through dollars. Even if two nations trusted each other, the middleman currency was unavoidable. But over the last decade, this pattern has been challenged. India and Russia agreed to settle energy deals in rupees and rubles. China and Brazil signed agreements to trade in yuan and rils. These are not symbolic acts. Each deal chips away at the necessity of holding dollars for trade. And when enough deals accumulate, a tipping point emerges where the dollar is no longer the unquestioned bridge between economies. The weakening also comes from the pursuit of new systems. The creation of the new development bank by BRICS was not just about lending money. It was about lending money outside the dollar framework. When nations borrow from this bank, they are not required to hold or repay in dollars. It creates a parallel stream of financial activity that bypasses the American currency altogether. Similarly, discussions within BRICS about creating a shared currency, or at least a currency basket, show a vision that stretches far beyond today's agreements. While a new global currency is not yet born, the very act of planning it signals to the world that the monopoly of the dollar is no longer absolute. Energy is perhaps the sharpest weapon in this weakening process. Oil is the foundation of the petrodollar system. For decades, major oil producers priced their exports exclusively in dollars. This arrangement ensured that every nation buying oil had to stockpile dollars, reinforcing demand. But cracks are appearing. China has purchased oil from Russia and the Middle East in yuan. India has settled transactions in rupees. Even whispers of Saudi Arabia considering non-dollar oil sales represent seismic shifts. If oil ceases to be tied exclusively to the dollar, the very backbone of dollar supremacy collapses. Demand for dollars will no longer be automatic. It will be a choice. And once it becomes a choice, nations will choose diversification. Gold also plays a role. In the shadows of these moves, BRICS nations are accumulating gold at record levels. Russia and China, in particular, have been hoarding reserves quietly, reducing exposure to the dollar. Gold-backed trade or currency alternatives, even if partial, erode trust in fiat systems dominated by one nation. It signals that wealth can be stored and transferred outside the dollar's reach. Every ton of gold bought is a declaration of independence, spoken without words, but louder than speeches. Technology further accelerates the process. Digital payment systems, once seen as conveniences, are now instruments of sovereignty. Russia's SPFS system, China's CIPS, and India's push for digital rupee settlements all point to a future where cross-border transactions no longer rely on SWIFT, Visa, or MasterCard, all of which are under US influence. When a country can settle international trade digitally, instantly and securely without touching the dollar, the appeal of alternatives multiplies. Technology makes what was once impossible not only possible, but efficient. The weakening grip is also psychological. For decades, nations accepted the dollar as inevitable. It was seen as stable, safe, unquestionable, but crises inside the United States itself. The 2008 financial collapse, massive debt levels, Political polarization, repeated debt ceiling standoffs have shaken that perception. If the US can print trillions of dollars to bail out its own system, what does that mean for the value of savings held abroad? If American politics can threaten default for domestic battles, what does that mean for foreign trust? The very aura of invincibility around the dollar is cracking, and perception is as powerful as reality. Once faith erodes, the system weakens faster than any policy can stop. What makes this process silent but powerful is that no single event will end dollar dominance. There will not be a morning when the world wakes up and declares the dollar dead. Instead, its supremacy will wither gradually. Trade flows will diversify. Debt will be issued in multiple currencies. Reserves will shift from greenbacks to gold, yuan, or local alternatives. Over years, the dollar's share of global reserves will decline from majority to plurality, and eventually it will become just one currency among many. The US will still be powerful, but its unique privilege will be gone. The weakening of the dollar's grip is not only a financial story, it is a political earthquake. America's ability to sanction, to isolate, to punish depends on dollar dominance. If countries can trade, settle, and save without touching US systems, sanctions lose power. Influence loses edge. The unipolar world fragments into multipolar currents. Nations, once too small to resist, suddenly find partners in BRICS who can shield them. The global order becomes less about what Washington decides and more about what collective blocs negotiate. That transformation does not require war. It only requires time. We are living in the early stages of this transition. Every non-dollar trade deal, every gold purchase, every digital payment test, every bank loan outside Western institutions is a thread pulled from the old fabric. Slowly, the weave unravels. By the time the world notices how weak the fabric has become, it will already be too late to repair it. The dollar's grip, once seen as eternal, is quietly slipping from the hands of the world. The story of global power has always been tied to control over resources. Empires rose because they commanded the flow of grain, gold, or spices. Nations fell because their fuel ran dry or their resources were cut off. In the modern era, the same truth holds. Oil, gas, rare earth metals, food, and water are not simply commodities. They are weapons. They are bargaining chips. They are the silent levers that determine which nations lead and which nations follow. BRICS understands this better than anyone, and it is in this domain of energy and resources that their revolution grows strongest. The power they hold collectively is not merely economic, but existential. For the nations of the world that depend on these flows, it is becoming impossible to ignore where true influence now lies. Russia is at the center of this energy equation. For decades, it has been one of the largest producers of oil and natural gas. Europe relied heavily on Russian pipelines to heat its homes, power its industries, and keep its lights on. The conflict in Ukraine and subsequent sanctions showed just how dependent much of the world was on Russian energy. When supplies were restricted, prices skyrocketed, and entire economies faced crisis. The message was unmistakable. The world cannot easily function without Russia's energy exports. That leverage is not a relic of the past. It remains a living tool, one that BRICS can integrate into a wider framework of influence. By aligning Russian oil and gas with BRICS strategies, the bloc has a bargaining chip that even Western sanctions cannot fully neutralize. China, on the other hand, has mastered the realm of industrial resources. Its control over rare earth elements, gives it influence over industries from smartphones to electric cars, from wind turbines to military hardware. These are not luxuries. They are essentials for the modern world. Without rare earths, there is no green transition, no digital future, no advanced weaponry. When China hints at limiting exports, global markets tremble. This is quiet power at its peak. While the West debates policies, China holds in its hands the minerals that make policies possible. Within the BRICS framework, this power multiplies. It ensures that the bloc is not only about traditional energy, but about the future energy of technology itself. Brazil plays its role by feeding the world. Its agricultural might is unmatched, producing soybeans, beef, coffee, sugar, and more. In a world where climate change threatens crops and populations continue to grow, food security becomes national security. Brazil's farmlands are as important to survival as oil fields or rare earth mines. China, the largest consumer of soybeans, already buys vast quantities from Brazil. The alignment within BRICS ensures that trade can be settled outside traditional Western channels, making the food-energy nexus a direct challenge to existing global trade norms. In times of scarcity, the nation that feeds is the nation that rules. Brazil's position in BRICS transforms agriculture from trade to leverage. India, often viewed through the lens of its massive population and technology sector, is also a key player in the energy landscape. As one of the fastest growing economies, its demand for oil and gas is enormous. By positioning itself within BRICS, India ensures preferential access to Russian energy and Brazilian agriculture, while aligning with Chinese technology flows. But India is not only a consumer. It is also a producer of coal and has ambitions in renewable energy that make it a crucial link between past and future power sources. In a world where energy transitions are messy, India represents both the present need for fossil fuels and the future shift to solar and wind. That dual role gives it influence beyond its borders. South Africa, though smaller in size, is not without weight. It holds vast mineral resources, including platinum and gold, which are critical for global markets. Platinum is essential for catalytic converters and green technologies, while gold remains the ultimate store of value in uncertain times. South Africa's role inside BRICS is not only as a supplier, but as a gateway to the African continent, where untapped reserves of oil, gas, and minerals lie waiting. In the long-term strategy, Africa will be the next great frontier of resource battles, and South Africa ensures that BRICS is already positioned inside that conversation. What makes BRICS unique is the complementarity of these strengths. One nation provides energy, another provides food, another provides minerals, another provides technology, another provides gateways. No single Western bloc can match this diversity in such concentrated form. NATO may have military might, the EU may have economic strength, but neither controls resources at this scale. The quiet revolution of BRICS is not only in creating alternatives to Western financial systems, but in tying those alternatives to the raw materials of survival. If you want to eat, if you want to build, if you want to drive, if you want to power your cities, you will have to deal with BRICS. That is not ideology, that is reality. The West has long used sanctions as a tool of control, but sanctions only work when the resources being sanctioned are replaceable. If a nation can turn to another supplier, the pain is temporary. BRICS is ensuring that when sanctions are used against one member, the others can absorb and redirect flows. When Russia was cut off from many Western markets, China and India stepped in as buyers. When China faced tariff wars, Brazil expanded trade. These moves show how BRICS turns individual vulnerabilities into collective strength. Sanctions that once isolated now push nations deeper into BRICS cooperation. In this way, the very tools of Western dominance accelerate the rise of alternatives. Energy and resources also tie directly into infrastructure projects. The Belt and Road Initiative, though primarily associated with China, is deeply tied to BRICS strategies. Pipelines, railways, and ports being built under this banner are designed not just for trade, but for resource flow. Oil from Russia to China, soybeans from Brazil to Asia, minerals from Africa to India. All of it requires arteries of movement. These projects ensure that BRICS does not only hold resources, but also controls the routes that carry them. Power lies not only in possession, but in distribution, and BRICS is quietly securing both. Another dimension of this revolution is pricing. For decades, commodities like oil were priced in dollars, reinforcing the petrodollar system. But if BRICS begins to set prices in local currencies, or in a future shared currency, the transformation will be profound. Imagine oil contracts denominated in yuan, soybeans priced in reals, or rare earths traded in a BRICS digital currency. That would not only weaken the dollar, but also strengthen internal cohesion within BRICS. It would mean that control over resources translates directly into control over financial systems. The two revolutions, financial and resource-based, would merge into one unstoppable force. Climate change adds urgency to this story. As the world faces droughts, floods, and shortages, resource control becomes more volatile. Nations will scramble for stable food supplies, secure energy, and reliable mineral flows. BRICS, by holding such a vast portion of these essentials, positions itself as the ultimate broker. In a crisis, nations will not care about ideology. They will care about who can deliver. BRICS intends to be the supplier of last resort, the guarantor of survival. That role, once consolidated, becomes a form of dominance more powerful than armies or speeches. Energy and resources are the bloodstream of civilization. Cut them off and economies collapse. Control them and nations obey. BRICS understands this truth and is building its revolution upon it. This is not a noisy revolution. It does not require shouting in international forums. It requires contracts, pipelines, reserves, and patience. And slowly, without fanfare, BRICS is turning its collective resources into weapons of change. For most of modern history, technology and finance have been the two pillars of Western dominance. The West created the global banking systems, the international payment networks, the credit card giants, and the rating agencies that decide who can borrow and at what cost. The West also created the software, the chips, the networks, and the platforms that run the modern digital economy. Together, these systems created a world where participation was not just encouraged, but mandatory. Because to trade, to grow, to connect, nations had no choice but to go through channels controlled by Washington, Brussels, London, or New York. What BRICS is doing now is building an entirely separate architecture. Quietly, carefully, but decisively, it is constructing a technological and financial world outside the West, one that does not ask permission and does not bend to old centers of power. Finance is the most obvious battleground. The dollar, the euro, and Western financial institutions have long dictated the terms of trade and borrowing. If a country wanted international loans, it turned to the IMF or the World Bank. If a business wanted to expand, it had to interact with Western rating agencies and banks. But BRICS introduced the new development bank, headquartered in Shanghai, to offer loans in local currencies, bypassing the dollar entirely. Unlike the IMF, which often attaches strict political conditions to loans, the BRICS Bank operates on the principle of mutual benefit. That alone is revolutionary because it strips the West of one of its most powerful tools, financial leverage. For many developing nations, this offers not only money, but dignity. They can borrow without being lectured, invest without being punished, and grow without being tied to Western agendas. Payment systems are the next frontier. The West built SWIFT, Visa, MasterCard, PayPal networks that process billions of transactions every day. But these networks also serve as weapons. When sanctions were placed on Russia, it was cut off from SWIFT. When other nations have faced disputes, they have seen their access restricted or their assets frozen. This has shown the world that these systems are not neutral. They are political. BRICS nations have responded with their own solutions. Russia created the SPFS messaging system as an alternative to SWIFT. China developed the CIPS network to facilitate UN-based settlements globally. India has pushed forward with its unified payments interface, now being linked to partners abroad. These may seem like isolated projects, but when connected under a BRICS umbrella, they form a parallel financial nervous system that cannot be switched off by Washington. Each transaction settled on these platforms is one less reliance on Western control. Beyond finance, technology is becoming the decisive terrain. China has already emerged as a rival to the United States in fields like artificial intelligence, 5G, and surveillance technology. Companies like Huawei and Tencent symbolize not just corporate success, but sovereign technological independence. By offering infrastructure to other nations, whether it is 5G networks, smart city systems, or cloud platforms, China ensures that countries no longer have to depend solely on Western firms like Google, Apple, or Microsoft. This expansion is not charity. It is strategy. It ties nations into a technological ecosystem where the center of gravity lies in Beijing, not Silicon Valley. When you control the networks that others depend on, you do not need armies to influence them. India, too, is carving a technological with its massive IT sector and its global dominance in software services. India provides BRICS with both human capital and technical capability. It has already pioneered digital identification systems, digital payments, infrastructure, and an expanding startup ecosystem. These tools can be exported and adapted across the BRICS network. A nation adopting India's payment platforms or digital ID systems is not just modernizing, it is embedding itself in a non-Western digital order. Over time, these layers accumulate, weaving a web that rivals the West's historic dominance in global tech. Brazil and South Africa may not have the same scale of technological power as China or India, but they play important roles in connecting regions. Brazil has advanced agricultural technology and biofuel expertise, which are critical in a world hungry for sustainable solutions. South Africa, meanwhile, serves as a bridge into Africa's emerging tech scene, where mobile banking, fintech, and local innovations are rising rapidly. By sharing platforms and systems, BRICS ensures that no single member is isolated, and that together they create a network that grows outward, pulling more nations in. Digital currencies represent another key move. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, are being developed rapidly across BRICS nations, particularly in China, with the digital yuan. Unlike cryptocurrencies, these are state-backed and can be used for official trade. Imagine a scenario where Russia sells oil to China not in dollars, but in digital yuan, transferred instantly across secure networks. Imagine India trading software services with Brazil in rupee-backed digital tokens. These experiments are already moving forward, and they promise to create a world where digital money moves without touching US banks or Western payment rails. The convenience, speed, and independence of these systems are too attractive for developing nations to ignore. Western technology has thrived because it monopolized platforms. Whether it was social media, search engines, or cloud services, most of the world had no option but to rely on American giants. But the monopoly is being challenged. TikTok showed that a Chinese app could dominate globally. WeChat showed how a super app could redefine communication and payments. Alibaba demonstrated that e-commerce need not run through Amazon. These examples prove that Western tech supremacy is not unbreakable. Once alternatives exist, they spread fast, especially in nations hungry for independence. And when BRICS supports these alternatives at a structural level, they no longer look like isolated successes. They become the backbone of a counter-system. Cybersecurity and data sovereignty are also critical dimensions. For decades, Western systems collected, stored, and often exploited data from across the world. But now, BRICS nations are asserting control over their own digital spaces. Russia demands that citizen data be stored within its borders. China enforces strict rules about foreign companies operating in its digital ecosystem. India, too, is developing policies to safeguard its data. These moves are not only about security, they are about sovereignty. Data is the oil of the digital age, and whoever controls it controls the future. BRICS is ensuring that the flow of this new oil does not run exclusively through Silicon Valley pipelines. Finance and technology are not separate. They are converging. Digital payment systems, blockchain experiments, fintech startups, and AI-driven finance tools are merging into one ecosystem. BRICS, by fostering cooperation across its members, is positioning itself at the intersection of this convergence. If successful, it will not only challenge Western banks and platforms, but create something entirely new, a global system where finance and technology serve as mutual reinforcements, independent of old powers. This is the real silent revolution, the building of an alternative operating system for the world. The West is watching these moves with alarm, but often with underestimation. Policymakers in Washington or Brussels still assume that their platforms are indispensable, that their financial institutions are irreplaceable, but the quiet progress of BRICS proves otherwise. Each time a payment is settled in local currency, each time a digital network is built outside Western oversight, each time a loan is issued without IMF conditions, the grip of the old system loosens. This is how revolutions work, not with sudden explosions, but with steady erosion. The construction of technology and finance outside the West is not a side project for BRICS. It is the heart of their vision. They know that military might alone does not define power in the 21st. Power lies in the platforms people use, in the currencies nations trade, in the systems that decide who is included and who is excluded. By building alternatives, BRICS is not simply challenging the West. It is creating a new map of the world, one where influence is distributed, not monopolized. This map is already being drawn in code, in contracts, in cables, in servers, in ledgers. The old order sees only fragments. The new order sees the whole picture. And slowly, piece by piece, that picture is becoming reality. Power often reveals itself in speed, nations racing to outdo one another in military buildups, corporations rushing to capture markets, leaders fighting for quick wins to satisfy short election cycles. But the deeper truth of history is that the most enduring shifts come not from noise or speed, but from patience. BRICS embodies this truth with precision. Its revolution is not being shouted from podiums or advertised with constant declarations. Instead, it is unfolding slowly, deliberately, and silently, using patience as its greatest weapon. This patience is what makes the movement underestimated. And it is also what makes it unstoppable. Patience begins with perspective. Western systems often operate on timelines measured in quarters or election cycles. Leaders are judged by what they achieve in 4 years, companies by what they report in 3 months. This obsession with short-term performance creates fragility. Policies are reversed when leadership changes. Strategies are abandoned when markets fluctuate. In contrast, BRICS nations operate with a timeline measured in decades. China thinks in terms of 50-year plans. Russia evaluates moves based on generational security. India frames its rise as a century-long project. Brazil and South Africa position themselves as future anchors in resource and regional power for the long haul. Together, this creates a culture where time is not an enemy, but an ally. The silent strategy of patience is visible in trade realignments. Nations within BRICS are not demanding the immediate collapse of the dollar system. They are not declaring war on Western finance. Instead, they are quietly signing trade deals in local currencies, slowly increasing the share of non-dollar settlements. A few percentage points at a time, year after year, this shift accumulates until the dollar's dominance is no longer natural but forced. By the time the world notices, the change has already taken root. Such is the nature of patient revolutions. They do not announce themselves, they simply become reality. Patience also appears in infrastructure projects. The Belt and Road Initiative, often misunderstood as a series of construction projects, is really a generational strategy. A port built in Africa today may not yield strategic dominance tomorrow, but in 2 decades, it becomes the artery through which trade flows bypass Western-controlled routes. A railway in Central Asia may not threaten today's order, but in 30 years, it will serve as the foundation of a Eurasian trade corridor independent of Western influence. BRICS understands that infrastructure is not about immediate profit, but about creating long-term dependencies. By investing now and waiting decades, they secure power that will last far longer than any political cycle in the West. Patience is equally critical in resource strategy. Russia knows that its vast oil and gas reserves will not disappear overnight. By gradually redirecting flows from Europe to Asia, it avoids confrontation and builds new loyalties. China, by slowly acquiring rare earth dominance and expanding its renewable capacity, does not need to declare control. It simply waits until the world realizes it cannot function without its supply chains. Brazil continues to grow its agricultural exports year after year until nations that once relied on the West for food security are bound to South America. South Africa, by patiently managing mineral exports and positioning itself within Africa, ensures that the continent's future growth remains tied to BRICS. None of these strategies require speed. They require consistency, and consistency multiplied by time becomes inevitability. Another layer of this silent strategy is seen in financial institutions. The new development bank was not created to immediately replace the IMF or World Bank. It was created to plant a seed. Each loan it issues in local currencies strengthens the idea that development can happen outside Western channels. Each project it funds without political strings builds trust among nations that have long felt exploited by Western lenders. With time, trust becomes habit, and habit becomes system. Decades from now, nations may turn to the BRICS Bank not because they reject the IMF, but because they no longer remember a time when they had no alternative. That is the essence of patient revolution. It normalizes itself until it no longer appears revolutionary at all. The silent strategy of patience extends into technology. China did not attempt to dominate global networks overnight. It began by copying Western platforms, then improving them, then exporting them. Step by step, without urgency, it created giants like Huawei, Alibaba, and Tencent. India, too, did not demand recognition as a tech leader overnight. It built its IT services sector one contract at a time, slowly becoming indispensable to global firms. Brazil advanced biofuel technologies over decades, and South Africa expanded regional fintech innovations at its own pace. Together, these efforts now converge, creating a technological ecosystem that can stand beside the West. It is not the product of sudden innovation, but of accumulated patience. Geopolitically, patience shields BRICS from direct confrontation. Instead of announcing themselves as rivals to NATO or the G7, they frame their moves as cooperation, development, or diversification. This allows them to grow without triggering the full resistance of entrenched powers. When the West dismisses their initiatives as symbolic or premature, BRICS quietly benefits. Every time the old order underestimates the new, it buys more time for the patient strategy to advance. By avoiding the appearance of a threat, BRICS ensures that it is not crushed in infancy. Instead, it matures under the radar until its strength is undeniable. Patience also shapes the psychology of their revolution. People across the global South have lived under Western dominance for centuries. They do not expect instant liberation. They understand that change requires endurance. This cultural understanding aligns perfectly with BRICS' strategy. Citizens do not demand immediate transformation. They are willing to wait for a better order as long as progress is steady. That willingness to endure makes the revolution sustainable. Unlike the fast, fiery revolutions that burn out quickly, this one gathers strength precisely because it grows slowly. Perhaps the most powerful element of this silent patience is that it teaches the world to adapt gradually. If BRICS were to demand instant global realignment, resistance would be overwhelming. But by moving slowly, they give nations time to adjust, to test, to adopt. A country that settles one trade deal in local currency does not feel like it is abandoning the dollar. A nation that borrows once from the new development bank does not feel like it is rejecting the IMF. But after repeating these small steps over years, the shift becomes embedded. The revolution succeeds not by forcing change, but by making change feel natural. That is the brilliance of patience. It transforms resistance into acceptance without anyone noticing when the line was crossed. The silent strategy of patience is not weakness. It is strength of the highest order. It is the discipline to resist the temptation of fast victories for the certainty of lasting dominance. It is the ability to see history not as a series of moments, but as a river flowing slowly toward its destination. BRICS does not need to defeat the old order in battle. It only needs to wait, to build, and to persist. Time itself is on their side. And time, when paired with patience, is the most powerful ally a revolution can ever possess. When a stone is dropped into still water, the waves that spread outward are often larger and more enduring than the splash itself. The BRICS revolution is that stone, and its impact will not be confined to the nations directly involved. Its movements in finance, technology, resources, and trade are already creating ripples that touch every continent, every economy, every household. These ripples are not immediately visible because they spread silently and gradually, but their reach is vast, and their consequences will reshape how the world organizes power, wealth, and influence. The global ripple effect is not a single event. It is a chain reaction, one that grows stronger with each passing year. The first ripple is financial. For decades, the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency has forced nations to structure their economies around it. When BRICS shifts toward local currencies, gold, or even digital alternatives, that ripple moves outward into every central bank on Earth. Countries that once relied exclusively on dollar reserves now begin to diversify. Small nations in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Look at how India pays Russia in rupees, or how China settles trade with Brazil in yuan. And they begin to wonder if they too can escape dollar dependency. Each diversification decision is small, but when repeated across dozens of economies, it becomes systemic. Soon, the global financial map is no longer centered on one currency, but on many. That ripple does not stop at central banks. It affects ordinary citizens when exchange rates shift, when import prices change, when local currencies gain or lose stability based on new patterns of trade. What begins as a financial experiment in BRICS becomes a reordering of everyday life across the world. The second ripple is political. Power in the modern world has been closely tied to financial control. America's ability to sanction nations, freeze assets, and block access to global markets has long been one of its most powerful weapons. But if BRICS continues building systems outside Western control, the ripple effect is that sanctions lose much of their sting. Nations once fearful of being cut off from the dollar system may feel emboldened to act more independently. This ripple will manifest in new alliances, new voting blocs at the United Nations, and new coalitions in international negotiations. Countries that once followed Western instructions out of economic fear may instead align with BRICS, because the consequences of defiance are diminished. The geopolitical chessboard tilts not with explosions, but with quiet rebalancing, one ripple at a time. The third ripple spreads through energy. When Russia sells oil to China in yuan, when Brazil exports food to India without touching the dollar, the energy markets themselves shift. Oil has been the backbone of the petrodollar system for decades. But if major exporters price in alternative currencies, the ripple flows through shipping contracts, insurance policies, and commodity markets. Energy importing nations from Africa to Southeast Asia begin to see that they too can negotiate in new ways. No longer trapped by one model, they explore alternatives. This ripple, subtle at first, could eventually redefine how energy is bought, sold, and consumed across the globe. Households feel it in the price of fuel. Governments feel it in the balance of payments, and corporations feel it in the cost of production. The ripple from BRICS energy realignment travels far beyond the bloc's borders. Technology is another vast ripple. When China exports 5G infrastructure, or India shares digital payment systems with African or Southeast Asian nations, those nations begin to operate inside a BRICS-aligned technological ecosystem. This ripple creates dependencies not on Western firms, but on BRICS innovators. Apps, data systems, and digital currencies spread from one region to another, carried not by ideology, but by convenience and cost. A country adopting a BRICS digital payment platform does not see itself as making a geopolitical choice. It simply sees efficiency. Yet that efficiency binds it into a new order. The ripple effect of technology is that once enough nations adopt these systems, Western platforms lose their monopoly. The result is not only competition, but fragmentation. The world begins to run on two or more parallel digital networks, each shaping commerce, communication, and culture in distinct ways. Another ripple lies in culture and perception. For decades, the narrative of globalization was written in Western voices. The idea was that modernity meant integration into systems created in New York, London, or Brussels. BRICS is rewriting that narrative. Through its actions, it tells developing nations there is another way. You do not have to surrender sovereignty to grow. You do not have to adopt foreign models to succeed. This ripple of perception spreads faster than any policy. Young entrepreneurs in Africa may look not to Silicon Valley but to Bangalore for inspiration. Policymakers in Latin America may see Beijing, not Washington, as the model of state-led growth. Citizens in Asia may consume media, products, and ideas shaped by BRICS rather than by the West. Over time, culture follows trade and perception follows culture. This ripple changes how billions imagine their future. The ripple effect also reaches global governance. Institutions like the IMF, World Bank, and WTO have long set the rules of engagement. But if BRICS institutions prove viable, whether the new development bank or alternative trade systems, other countries will demand seats at those tables. The ripple is that global governance becomes multipolar. Instead of a single set of institutions dictating rules, multiple centers of authority emerge. This weakens the dominance of old structures and forces reforms they resisted for decades. The global South, long marginalized in decision-making, suddenly finds leverage. That leverage shifts policies on trade, debt relief, climate agreements, and beyond. The ripple turns frustration into empowerment. Ordinary people around the world will feel these ripples in daily life. Imagine a farmer in Africa selling crops directly to China using a BRICS-backed digital payment system, skipping Western banks altogether. Imagine a small business in Latin America borrowing from the BRICS Bank instead of facing IMF austerity conditions. Imagine a consumer in Asia buying goods priced not in dollars, but in local currencies, shielding them from external shocks. These small, tangible changes accumulate into new realities. The ripple effect ensures that the BRICS revolution is not confined to boardrooms or government offices. It reaches households, markets, and communities. The environment and climate policy will not escape these ripples either. As BRICS controls vast natural resources and develops renewable energy strategies, it will shape how the world approaches sustainability. If BRICS sets standards for green technologies, those standards ripple outward. Countries eager for affordable solar, wind, or biofuel technology will adopt BRICS models instead of Western ones. This shift will redefine not only markets, but the politics of climate negotiations. The ripple is that power over the green transition no longer rests in the West's hands alone. Even in the military sphere, where BRICS does not function as an alliance, the ripple is visible. If financial and technological independence grows, nations feel less bound to align militarily with Western blocs. Defense partnerships, joint exercises, and arms deals begin to expand between BRICS and non-BRICS states. The ripple is subtle but powerful. Global security no longer orbits around a single pole of power, but begins to distribute itself across multiple nodes. The consequences of this ripple will shape conflicts, peace talks, and regional balances for decades. The final ripple is psychological. For so long, the world has been told there is no alternative. Western finance, Western technology, Western governance were portrayed as the only path forward. BRICS, by building alternatives, destroys that myth. The ripple of possibility spreads. If BRICS can build its own payment systems, why can't others? If BRICS can settle trade without dollars, why can't others? If BRICS can create new financial institutions, why can't others? The psychological ripple may be the most dangerous to the old order because once people believe alternatives exist, the monopoly of thought is broken forever. These ripples spreading outward will not stop at national borders. They will touch every market, every family, every government. What began as a bloc of 5 nations working quietly together is already reshaping the world through these unseen waves. The silent revolution of BRICS is not just about the bloc itself, it is about the countless ways its actions alter the environment around it, forcing adjustments, creating opportunities, and redefining normalcy for billions across the globe. The splash may have been quiet, but the ripples are loud in their consequences, and they will continue to travel outward, reshaping the waters of the world in ways that no one can ignore.